Hey, welcome. I'm Mike Gastin, and I am glad to see you. How have you been? Did you enjoy your Super Bowl weekend? I know I did. Well, hopefully you got together with a bunch of friends, maybe had some chicken wings, maybe a couple soda pops. And whether your team was vanquished or victorious, I have some good news for you today. I am not going to talk about the Super Bowl, nor am I going to talk about the commercials. That's right, I'm a marketing guy, but I'm not going to talk about them. They're interesting, they're fun, but ultimately these things don't really matter that much. I do want to talk about something today, though, that I think is going to have a long-term impact on you, your business, your leadership style, or your marketing. And that's a recent news story. Maybe you've seen it, but Buzzfeed, Vice, and Huffpost have been, quote-unquote, undergoing massive layoffs. They've been letting go a handful of journalists, totaling over 1,000 between the three. And this is a trend that's been going on in digital news and digital media for a while now, as well as traditional, to be quite honest. But these three have been making some headlines because they've let a handful of journalists go. Those journalists have hit the streets, aka they've run to Twitter, letting the world know that they are displeased and sharing some of their frustrations and thoughts around that. There's been some sniping back and forth between the right and the left around this, and people have been enjoying the pain of others as they do on the internet. But I want to talk about this today, not from a political standpoint, but from the standpoint of someone who cares about free enterprise, about business entrepreneurship and marketing. And here's the thing, I think there are three forces behind these recent layoffs, these firings, that will help us both understand what's going on with these digital media platforms, but more importantly, will help us understand the things that we need to be paying attention to. Because I think these three forces affect all of us. Anybody in business, anybody in marketing, anybody in leadership has to be aware of these forces and has to be ready to confront them if they're not already. So why don't we jump into it? So the first force that I'd like to share with you is this idea of authenticity versus truth. I think that Vice and Buzzfeed and HuffPo are bumping up against the hard reality of truth. There's a big push. There's been a trend for many years now about being authentic. We tend to think that authenticity trumps everything, and the fact of the matter is it doesn't. Authenticity is important, but authenticity is neither good nor bad. It's just a thing. If you're authentic, it just means you're being real. That could mean that you're being a real jerk because that's your authentic self. And I feel that these three media outlets especially, but many like them, and also many brands do this as well. They kind of embrace their authentic self. I just want to be real, thinking that being real is the thing that will attract people. And yes, to a degree that does, but it only attracts people that are just like you. Now you could argue, as a brand, I only want to do business with people just like me. But you see, you want to do business with customers. And customers are not always just like you. Customers are people that need you, that maybe compliment you, that look to you, that depend on you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that your customers are you. And I think that this is where these media outlets have made a mistake. They've said, let's be our authentic selves. But the problem is they're news outlets. And news outlets are looked at to provide truth, to provide information, unadulterated, unarbitrated, pure information, and then let us decide what we think about any given situation. Now, these groups have transgressed that. Now, it would be different if they said that they weren't news organizations, that they didn't put themselves forward as trusted sources for information and perspective and insight. But instead, they've kind of positioned themselves in such a way that they have transgressed their own charter. Their charter is to be a news organization, and yet they focus more on being authentic. And essentially, these organizations tend to lean left. They're very progressive in their worldview, and they paint a picture and spin a narrative that's very progressive. Now, I'm not here to condone or condemn that. That's not my job, at least in this type of setting. Let's have a drink and we could talk about it. But the fact of the matter is they have transgressed this concept of authenticity over truth. I feel that if they would embrace truth, embrace those things that are real, embrace factual information, things that are objectively true, objectively good, that they would have fared better. I think that they've lost some of their audience and they've actually hurt themselves. They've limited the number of people that could be enjoying their products and services. The second thing that I think is a giant force, and this is one that rarely gets talked about, but is this force of disintermediation. And that's just a fancy word for saying cutting out the middleman, getting rid of intermediaries. All of us consumers have gotten better and better leveraging digital technologies and otherwise to cut out the middleman. Industries like real estate are changing, news is changing, entertainment is changing because we're able to go directly to the source. We don't need cable television like we used to. We don't need a taxi company like we used to. We can just go right to an app, call up a driver, and interact directly with that driver through a platform that disintermediates the old way of doing things. And I think these platforms are suffering from that. They probably drank the heady wine of we're part of the disruption. But while they're so busy disrupting the industry and upsetting traditional media, they didn't realize that there's a whole nother level of source that people can go to get their news. I can go onto YouTube at any given moment and get a man on the street with a video camera providing me live insight into what's going on the street. I can read blogs from industry experts. I don't need to buy magazines. I don't need to subscribe to the New York Times anymore. I can get this information pretty accurately and reliably and quickly and cheaply going right to the source. And so these groups, these three specifically, but any like them, are struggling from the vicious force of disintermediation. And I think that for all of us, we need to look at our businesses and say, okay, where am I relying on intermediaries? Does my business process, does my supply chain, does my value chain to my customer rely on intermediaries? Now, some of them can't be helped, and they shouldn't be. There's nothing wrong with having good strategic partners in a business, in your supply chain. But look at your business. Where are you relying on an intermediary? Where are you vulnerable? You want to go through a process of trying to eliminate and minimize any exposure you have to that disintermediation process. The third and last thing that these news outlets are suffering from is a penchant for using other platforms to access an audience. Essentially, they are digital sharecropping. What I mean by that, and Buzzfeed is probably especially egregious in this area, is they built their whole platform based on Facebook. Buzzfeed was almost like a parasite to Facebook. Facebook had the audience. Facebook had the access to the people, to the throngs and throngs of viewers that Buzzfeed wanted. Rather than trying to build their own asset, trying to build their own audience, they leveraged Facebook's audience. They advertised heavily on Facebook. They partnered with Facebook to create fantastic content on Facebook. They made changes every time Facebook wanted a change. When Facebook wanted to get into video, BuzzFeed switched from listicles to quick videos. BuzzFeed was at the beck and call of Facebook. When Facebook was under heavy fire from Brussels and the US Congress for the way that it served up information and for the questions around fake news and Russian interference, whatever that possibly was in the election, BuzzFeed got the short end of the stick. They did not own their own asset. They relied on Facebook. Facebook owned the audience. We have to look at our own businesses. Are we digital sharecropping? Are you or am I relying on somebody else's asset? Do I own my own audience? Do I control my own customer list? Or does somebody else do that? And if I'm looking at one other outlet as my key source for getting leads, for getting customers, and for speaking to the people that I need to speak to, then I am vulnerable. You got to change that. So I would encourage you, take a look at your business. Are you digital sharecropping? Have you gotten excited about social media and put all your eggs into one basket? And it's okay to be on Facebook. It's okay to be on Instagram. It's okay to be on Twitter, fill in all the blanks. The trick is you want to set yourself up to convert them. So get their attention on Facebook, but convert them to your list. Get their information, own that asset. Guys, I hope this was useful. I love you all, and I'll catch you in the next video.